Good afternoon, everybody. Today we are having our Meet the Pro workshop series with Dr. Al Crosby, a polymer scientist from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Dr. Crosby is professor of polymer science and engineering at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and is also the director of the Crosby Lab, which takes inspiration from examples in nature, as well as ubiquitous yet complex materials such as fabric, to develop and exploit simple, creative, and novel design paradigms that change the way scientists, engineers, and the general public use and understand materials. The lab organizes research along four themes: bio-inspired adhesion and friction in a product called GEXskin, growth and assembly, mechanics of gels, tissues and thin films, and impulsive deformations. Dr. Crosby earned his bachelor's in civil engineering from the University of Virginia and his PhD in materials science and engineering from Northwestern University. He's won many awards and actually started winning them for his work even before he finished his PhD, with the Adhesion Society Allen Ghent Award in 1999, National Academy of Engineering Frontiers of Engineering Award, has been recognized as a National Academy of Inventors Fellow, and was also featured on CNN Money Fortune magazine's Science Breakthroughs. He won the Adhesion Society Excellence in Adhesion Award for 2019 and is now the current president of the Adhesion Society. Welcome, Dr. Crosby. It's great to have you here today.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I'm glad to be here. All right, great. Well, I have the chat going, so if you have questions, you can send it that way, or you can just maybe it's just between Matt's connection and my connection. That would be the best. So feel free to interrupt me. But it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon and to be a part of this Meet the Pro series that Matt is holding. It's really a wonderful resource, especially given the current situation. So I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen. Excellent. So this is basically what Matt was going through in terms of an introduction, but this is where I wanted to start. Since I haven't been a part of the Meet the Pro series before, what I wanted to do today, I only have really 2 slides to go through, but I thought I would give you a little bit of background of who I am and what I do. And that's what I'll do on this slide. And then on the next slide, I'll go into a little bit more depth about what we do in our research group at UMass Amherst. And then I'll open it up for questions and discussion and see what you're all interested in learning about, if anything. So a little background on myself. I was born in Port Jervis, New York, if anybody knows where that is. It's about 4 hours west of here, southwest. But at a pretty young age, I moved out to Erie, Pennsylvania, which is about, 10 hours west of here, out on the Great Lakes. And if you know anything about Erie receives a lot of snow. It's right in between Cleveland and Buffalo and Pittsburgh. So as you might imagine, it sees a very large amount of snow, probably about 3 times as much as what Amherst receives each year. But I loved growing up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And while I was growing up, I was interested, as probably many of you are, in a wide variety of topics. I never saw myself, back then anyway, being a polymer scientist. Didn't even know probably what a polymer was at that point. Some of the things that I was interested in particular, were politics and architecture. I had many opportunities through high school, especially, to really develop and get to know architecture in particular quite a bit. And I maintained a pretty active set of activities towards politics and law. I found both of those topics to be really interesting. And that whole kind of collection of interests led me to go to college down at the University of Virginia, which I started a long time ago. Now looking back, it was back in 1992. I chose the University of Virginia because it had really great strength, especially in architecture and law, and had a strong engineering aspect, which Even from a very young age, going back to like elementary school, I always loved building things and really studying how things worked. I was curious from kind of a science and engineering point of view, that carried throughout my whole kind of elementary school, middle school, and high school careers. So I chose the University of Virginia so that I could kind of equally go through and feel out engineering and politics and a little bit of architecture along the way. At UVA, I ended up majoring in civil engineering and applied mechanics, and I loved it. And the one reason why I chose that subject as an undergraduate is because civil engineering, if you don't know, is the engineering field that is at the heart of building all of the infrastructure upon which a community or a nation kind of depends upon: bridges, roads, managing rivers and wetlands and lakes. Everything that, like I said, a community or a nation depends upon is involved in civil engineering. And I thought that by learning those aspects, it would serve me well if I was to go on and try to get involved in politics and law eventually. However, when I was pursuing this, I had another interesting opportunity kind of come upon me, and that was to perform research in material science and engineering. That was in my freshman year, my first year. And there's kind of a funny story that goes along with this, and I like sharing it because, especially with people that are looking to try to direct their future kind of careers and education steps. I was a freshman, as I said, and I had to work right from the very beginning in college in order to be able to provide money to help support and help provide funding while I was going to college. And at the time, right after I joined at UVA, I found a job at a local restaurant and loved working at the restaurant, but the hours were not ideal, especially when you're the first hired at a restaurant. You are often given the Friday night, Thursday night, and Saturday night shifts and late night shifts. So I was always on the lookout for other opportunities to make money. And I saw an advertisement for a teaching assistant position in material science and engineering. And so I applied for that. I brought my application and to the professor that was advertising this. And I asked if he asked if I had ever taken that class. And I said, no, I'm only a freshman. And he said, you don't really understand how this works. And I said, no, I have no idea. But as it turns out, if you don't know this, teaching assistants are almost always graduate students, or at least students that have taken the class before. So of course he said you can't apply for this position. So as I was turning around and walking down the hallway away from him, I turned around again and asked him if there was anything else that he could pay me for. And he asked if I had ever done research, and I said, of course not. And he said, well, if you're interested, you can come back and apply for that and start a research position in his laboratory and be paid for that. So I took him up on that opportunity, and that turned out to be one of the best decisions really of my life, because it opened my eyes to material science and engineering and to research, both of which I fell in love with during my undergraduate career. So I continued to work in his labs for the next 3.5 years of my undergraduate. And that professor turned out to be a great mentor, really teaching me a lot of aspects about science and about what a career in science could be. He also encouraged me not to change my major. He thought civil engineering and applied mechanics would serve me well. And it has. It really did. And I never looked back. One of the things that he opened my eyes to was in my junior year of college. He asked if I ever considered graduate school and pursuing a PhD. And again, I said no. So my sisters and I are first generation college educated students. So we were the first in our family to go to college. And up until this point, when I was an undergraduate, none of us had gone on to graduate school, and we had no idea what life beyond undergraduate was. And I told him I had never considered graduate school because I didn't want to go into debt. I envisioned myself getting a job, working for a few years, and then if that company would support me in pursuing a higher education degree, then I would do so. Um, and he opened my eyes by telling me that that in the sciences and engineering fields, nearly everybody that chooses to pursue a PhD is supported. And when I say supported, what that means is that the university will actually give you money for your tuition, and you will also get a salary to be a graduate student. So just to take on that pursuit of a PhD, actually you'll be paid for, and they'll pay you to go to school and get that degree. And that sounded like a pretty good deal to me. So I took that on and I applied for to 3 universities, and I was lucky enough to get into all of those. But I chose to go to Northwestern University out in Evanston, Illinois, and pursue a PhD in material science and engineering. My PhD focused on adhesion, which, as if you were on when Matt was introducing me, adhesion is one of the topics of which we still conduct research. And the things that, why would I want to study adhesion, even at a PhD level? What I had known at that time and had learned from my undergraduate is that most things fail. So most engineering applications often fail at an interface where 2 materials are coming together. So how do I take a ceramic and match it with a polymer? Or how do I take, my biological tissue, say a heart, and put an implant into that? The failure is usually at that interface between that biological tissue and that synthetic material that's trying to help provide new function. So interfaces are critically important, and it's at the interface where adhesion plays a primary role in controlling performance. And so I decided to take this on and study adhesion for my PhD. I completed my PhD in 4 years, and during that time, I still did not know whether I wanted to go into academia and become a professor, or if I wanted to go into industry, or if I wanted to work at a national lab. So I decided to do a postdoctoral study, and I actually applied for and received offers, one at or postdocs at a national lab, which is what I chose. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I also pursued a postdoc at IBM, an industrial laboratory, as well as at Cornell in an academic laboratory. So when you're moving on to a postdoc, you have these multiple opportunities or multiple pathways that you can take. I chose to go into a government lab, and I chose NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have 2 locations. The primary location is down in Gaithersburg, Maryland, directly outside of Washington, D.C. The second location is out in Boulder, Colorado. NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is the only national lab that is within the Department of Commerce. So it's the only national laboratory focused on helping the economy grow for the United States. And in that, this is a pretty nice place to do fundamental research because it's really encouraged to share all of your results and all of your research and all of your ideas with the public. And this is obviously at the heart of the scientific process, and it's something that's really means a lot to me. And so being a part of a facility that has a lot of resources and can conduct fundamental science to help engage industry and engage the broader society is a nice place to spend some time. Some of the things that you may know NIST for, that they're quite known or well known for, is they are the holders of the atomic clock, so they keep the official time of the nation, and really this is critical for controlling or helping navigate satellites and space travel, as well as timing for all of the networks and infrastructure of computing, and on and on. They also hold a lot of the different standards and standard materials and testing equipment for everything from fundamental materials to devices. So at NIST, I worked on developing new methods to conduct research at extremely high rates so that you could conduct maybe 8,000, 10,000 experiments in the same time frame as a single experiment conventionally would. So this is called high throughput experimental methods. And I worked on that for about 2 years before applying for academic positions. And I focused in on trying to find faculty positions or professorships in material science and engineering, of which polymer science and engineering is a subset. And so I was lucky enough to receive an offer from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which has the leading kind of polymer science and engineering department in the nation. And among material science and engineering, we're often ranked in the top 5 to top 10. So I joined that in 2002. And before I move on to tell you about some of the research that we do at UMass Amherst, this is I not only run a research group, and this is a picture of some of the students in my research group, but I also have 3 children of my own that are shown up here, and a 1-year-old or a 1.5-year-old dog named Millie. So my children are 15, 13, and 10. So they are, and in fact, you can see some of them in this picture down below, including Millie. So they are really, they get to know all of my researchers and are obviously a big part of my life. So with that, I'll just take a few minutes to tell you about some of the research that we do in my lab. My research group is focused on bio-inspired materials mechanics. I've worked at UMass Amherst since 2002, so I've led this research group for the last 18 years. One of the oldest subgroups or sub-themes within this overall research area is focused on hierarchical adhesion and friction control. And this particular topic has received a lot of notice in the popular news over the last, in popular media over the last 20 years. Our research in particular has received quite a bit of notice over the last 8 or 9 years. So hierarchical adhesion and friction is at the heart of what controls or allows systems like geckos and many insects to use adhesion in the process of locomotion. So it allows these organisms to not only attach to surfaces, but also release their feet in a very quick manner, very fast manner, in order to be able to move across, whether it's ceilings or walls or trees or rocks. And this ability is something that engineers have often wanted to do, but it's been difficult to achieve with conventional ways of controlling adhesion. We developed some first very insightful theories, mathematical theories, back in 2009, which gave rise to some new insight of how materials should be constructed to enable the performance of, say, a gecko. We built material models and composite materials. Some of them are pictured here, and these products are now called GEXskin. So a product named GEXskin was invented in my laboratory back in, we filed the initial patents in 2009. And we made the first publication of this in 2012. In 2012, we were recognized with being named one of the top 5 science breakthroughs by CNN, Money, and Fortune magazine, as well as a number of other awards. And we've been, you may have seen things on our research in a variety of programs on Discovery Channel, History Channel, BBC, PBS, NPR. We've been kind of covered all over, because what we can do with this material is we can hang up weights. On this picture here, this is a piece of our material. The area of this is about the size of your hand. as you can see here. And you can hang up words of this is 250 or 300 pounds. And then when you want to, you can actually just peel this off with virtually zero force from a glass plane or from a wall. And you can do this over and over and over again. So you can find videos on YouTube showing a lot of demonstrations of this. But it's not just the materials development, but we actually, as I pointed out, at the origin of this, it was all a mathematical theory that not only led to the development of this new material, but it actually allowed us to understand how this material connects to animals such as and to flies and spiders and other insects. And one of the really cool things, so that I was really intrigued by, is that if you've heard anything about the gecko, a lot of people focus on the little hairs that cover the toe pads. These are called setae or spatulae. And these little hairs are often described as the most enabling feature of the gecko in controlling their adhesion. And they play an important role. However, a lot of our research and our theory really allowed us to realize that potentially even a more important mechanism for the gecko is that they have tendons which actually stitch down into their skin. So if you know anything about your own body, you know that tendons connect bone to muscle. They don't go anywhere near the skin. However, in the gecko system, the tendons actually go from the skeleton right down into the skin. And that connection is actually one of the most important connections for giving rise to the ability to control adhesion and use adhesion to move. So we continue to work in this area quite a bit. We are now developing adhesives and understanding of adhesion for attaching things to living bodies and skin. And this is important for developing or like making flexible electronics and wearable electronics a lot more comfortable and a lot more healthy for humans as well as other animals, where we like to attach sensors and learn about the environment and how they move within the environment. The other three research groups I'll highlight quickly. We have a very strong effort on understanding high-speed movement in different organisms. A few examples are shown here. This is the mantis shrimp. The mantis shrimp can accelerate their hammer-like appendage underwater at accelerations of about 4,000 G, 4 to 1000 G. And so this is extremely high accelerations. It can reach velocities of about 40 meters per second and do this repeatedly without requiring any kind of chemical reaction. The trapjaw ant actually can close its jaws, close its mandibles at about 1 million meters per second squared. So it's about 100,000 G. And when it closes their mandibles in this manner and points its head down on the ground, it can actually propel its body about 1 meter in the air as an escape mechanism. Again, it can do this repeatedly without any kind of chemical reaction. The key to all this is that they use a series of components that are basically actuators, like little motors or muscles, springs, and latches. They're actually fairly simple, but they're incredibly important if we want to try to understand how to store energy and recover energy very efficiently. So this whole research effort is about how to manage energy flow and how do we collect energy, store it, and recover it very quickly and reliably without using very toxic or costly kind of materials or processes. So we study really fundamental materials motions like this one. This is high-speed imaging of a recoiling elastic band. So it's really just a snapping of a rubber band. But by studying the fundamental details here and developing some theories, we actually have demonstrated a new kind of elastic band. This is really a spring. And by structuring it in a very efficient way, we can make this recoil process incredibly efficient. Let me explain what I mean by that. So when you snap a rubber band, just like shooting a rubber band, you stretch it, you're storing elastic energy. And then when you release it, that's being converted into kinetic energy. In a typical band, you may lose about 20 to 30 or 40% of the elastic energy. So that means all of that like lost energy cannot be used to move the rubber band. However, when we structure this spring in a certain way, we can actually only lose 5% of the energy. So it's an incredible gain in terms of energy efficiency by just understanding how structure of a material can be used to impact these dynamic properties. The other kind of fun thing that we're able to do is by understanding this role of structure, we can create little autonomous like snapping devices. And this is something that maybe some of you have played with sometimes. These are like little snap or poppers where you bend them and you place them down on a table, and they'll they'll snap through and they'll jump off that table about a meter in the air, or a few centimeters in the air anyway. Those are called poppers. They're a common toy. And however, in order to do that more than once, after one snaps, you have to rebend it with your hands, right? Put more energy back in, and then it'll bounce again. Well, we actually have taken our knowledge of this system and kind of everything we've learned, and we've created these little poppers that you can add a little bit of fuel, if you will, or a little bit of energy, and then they can pop on their own 20 or 30 times, and they can actually transverse stairs all on their own without any additional energy input. So this is pretty cool because, again, it kind of shows how you can use one source of energy and get a lot of return on that. I'll just finish by mentioning we also study growth and assembly of materials. We have strong collaborations trying to understand how growth processes in flower petals are connected to growth processes in skin of snakes and other lizards. And this is all related to development processes like your fingerprints and how they develop. And we can use all of this knowledge to develop new advanced materials that are more efficient. For example, this is a ruberine crystal. When you wrinkle it in this way, like we have, you can actually increase the conductivity of that material by controlling the number of wrinkles. So again, we can take inspiration from nature and use it to increase the efficiency of synthetic materials for new processes. And I'll just end. Our last subgroup down here is really studying the fundamental mechanics of soft gels and tissues that are really difficult to handle. And one of the things that we invented about 10 years ago was a technique that's being shown here, which is it's called cavitation rheology. You simply insert a needle and pressurize a fluid at the tip of the needle. And at a critical pressure, which you'll see when it hits, this red dot hits that peak, you see the evolution of a bubble inside this gel. That pressure at which that bubble snaps open can be directly related to the mechanical properties of the gel or the tissue that this needle is in. And what's really cool about this is that this is one of the first methods developed for understanding or studying how stiff your tissues are in a living system. So if you've never thought about this before, it's actually really important for understanding how cancer develops or propagates, or how injuries happen inside brains or hearts or other soft tissues. You have to know the mechanical stiffness of that tissue. However, all of our knowledge in this field has really been developed by taking the tissue out, let's say taking a slice out of a brain and putting it into an instrument in a lab and studying the stiffness. Our technique allowed us to actually study properties when they're in their native state in a non or minimally invasive manner. So you could actually study, if you had different treatments, you can study how these properties were being changed. And so a very simple process of blowing a very small bubble gives rise to a large impact in terms of studying biology and material science. So that was a fairly quick 360-degree tour of my research group. And, I'll just end on saying that all of this comes together with the graduate students and postdoctoral researchers and undergraduate researchers and high school researchers that participate in our laboratory. We often have 3 to 5 undergraduate researchers in our lab every year. And we many times have high school researchers that reach out to do volunteer internships or research internships supported by Matt's program in our lab, and they work directly with the graduate students and postdocs in my group, some of whom are shown here. And we have a lot of fun and learning about how to do science, how to analyze, and how to be creative in the lab. So I will stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments based on that. It's like there's a question from Serafina. I'll just read it, and then if there's more, Serafina, feel free to jump in. When taking on a research project, you start with a problem you want to solve in the real world, or do you make an observation and see where it goes? Oh, that's a great question. Let me think about it for a minute before I answer, because I'm probably all over the place in terms of how I do this. So, in fact, I am. I'm all over the place. In fact, in all of those examples and everything I've worked on in research for the last 24 years, each project has a different way of starting. So let me explain what I mean by that. I'll start with the gecko adhesion project first. So as I mentioned, my PhD is on adhesion, but at that time, I did not work at all on biologically connected adhesion. In fact, I was studying basically how Scotch tape works. And that wasn't the title of my PhD thesis, but that's essentially what it was. And so I had this knowledge of adhesion. And right when I was graduating, there was a researcher out at Berkeley who had made some measurements on the hairs that cover the toes of geckos. And I read some of his papers on this and was aware, and it was covered in the popular press. In fact, I remember reading an article that my sister passed along to me from the Washington Post on some of this. And some of the comments that researcher made connected with what I knew about, say, how Scotch tape worked, and was really connected to some of the research I was doing at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And so when I started my research career at UMass, I had this observation, as you would put it here, where I wanted to take, the observation from the gecko and bring that and combine that with our knowledge of say, synthetic adhesion. And so I started it just from that observation. It wasn't really set out with a very clear goal. In fact, I just wanted to understand how patterns. So gecko hairs make patterns on the toes of geckos, and I wanted to understand how patterns control adhesion. That hadn't been very answered at all previously in the scientific literature. However, by following my training and the way that we work through that problem of how do patterns affect adhesion, we were then approached in 2008 by a team of researchers, and this included people at Draper Labs, if you're familiar with that, out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Stanford, and Case Western, who were trying to make basically gloves for people to be able to climb. And they were having a really difficult time understanding why they couldn't develop climbing technologies for humans. And they knew of our work and kind of all the fundamental work that we had done. So they asked us to come on and really attack that problem. So this is a case where we were doing research purely based on an observation. And then we were given this problem of how do you actually make something as large as a human or something as large as a gorilla, be able to use adhesion. And so we took that on with the way that we did, and that's when we developed GEXSkin out of that. So I think that's a really nice demonstration of how sometimes it's an observation, and other times you can be faced with the problem of how to do it. The last example that I highlighted on this cavitation rheology, that was very much a problem that was handed to us. Tissue engineers at the University of Pittsburgh were interested. They were implanting tissue scaffolds. So these are materials that are implanted into a body, and then your cells grow around it to try to replace, let's say, a meniscus or something like that in your knee. And they want to, one of the hardest things, one reason why, if you look about prosthetic materials that go in your body, they're mostly made out of metals or really hard plastics. They're very different than the materials that your body naturally uses. And one reason for that is because the materials break down. They're not strong enough, like most synthetic materials break down. But in order to overcome that and kind of develop better materials, we need to study the mechanical properties inside the body. And so this team of researchers at Pittsburgh contacted us because they knew of our expertise in soft materials and mechanics. And we developed this, my student and I developed this idea of blowing a bubble inside a soft tissue. And from there, we developed cavitation rheology, which it's grown. When I say that we developed it about 12 years ago, I now lead a multi-person, multi-team, multi-university team. It's about $4 million worth of funding on cavitation rheology. And it's related to studying traumatic brain injury and breakdown of gels used in soft robotics. It's in coding, so it extends all over. But it started with a very focused kind of problem. Anyway, so it's both, and I try to encourage that in my students to always be open and really you just want to bring. It's a very creative process. It's one thing that I don't think. I don't know anything about you, Serafina, or Natalie, or Matt much, but it's often, science is presented to middle school and high school students as being, it's almost presented in the contrast or like the total opposite of art. And I actually see it to be totally linked with art and creative processes. My laboratory and the way I approach science is a very creative process. I often have artists in my lab, and I think that the creative artists always invent, always create. They know exactly how to use materials. They know how things kind of work. They just don't write it down. The scientists just learn how to write it down sometimes. That's really, to me, the only difference is just reporting and writing it down in a little bit more systematic manner and going through that peer review process. I think artists often have that peer review through their exhibitions and galleries and kind of much more maybe a dialogue based feedback, just a little different in the way that feedback and record keeping is kept.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, it looks like Natalie asked, where do you see polymer science going in the future? Or how do you think it might change? That's a great question too. There are so many ways to answer this question. Let me start off with almost saying something that we've been working on for a while. Not we as our group, yes, but the broader field of polymer science. And that is how to use not only polymers and materials, but all of our resources on this planet much more, sustainably. And this has been a big emphasis. You've probably seen a lot of the press around all the microplastics and all the plastic waste that comes about. That's an example of where polymers and plastics and materials are used in it's not the material that it's bad, it's the way that society has used them, right? And I think polymer science has to, again, take the lead, and we are taking the lead in many ways, of developing materials that, kind of adapt to the way people use them, which is not in a very reliable way or a very sustainable way. So we need to create materials that are developed out of natural resources and return to those natural resources within a very limited time frame, and do not really increase the carbon footprint at all of the materials used. But a couple things that I want to bring about here, you want to, it's a very striking balance, and I think this whole COVID-19 situation actually demonstrates it, where plastics, and polymers, many of them were developed to, enhance or minimize kind of contamination and transfer of bacteria or viruses. And that's led to this kind of single-use kind of plastic kind of development. However, with that comes environmental concerns. So you always need kind of this constant trade-off of like utility for keeping people healthy, but also keeping the planet healthy. And I think that polymer science, you'll see, and you'll even hear much more, whether it's all framed under the context of polymer science, much more coming out to show how we're leading, and materials really play a really critical role in navigating this critical balance of maintaining a healthy society and healthy world or earth all at the same time. They're one and the same, right? And I think materials and material science are set to play a very important role in that, in the future of that. So I think you'll almost everything that I'm involved in, I tried to show. I probably didn't talk about it enough in terms of the Gecko project, but definitely in terms of the impulsive deformation, I tried to highlight all of that is really about energy use. The Gecko and the adhesion, one reason why engineers want that is because we can join things and dismantle them with minimal energy. So you can bring things together, have it be very strong, and use a piece. And then when you want to reuse that material or invent a new device, you just break it apart and use those components again in a different way. It's one of the hardest things about recycling is actually breaking things apart. And so since it's so difficult, they get put into the landfill. And so if you can understand how to have a strong adhesive, but yet weak when you want it to be weak, then you can actually start to recycle things really sustainably. So anyway, I see the whole kind of keeping the health of society and health of the earth as a big underlying theme for polymer science in the future.
Super interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
That's great, Al. Much appreciated.
Like that. And one of those pictures, I should have pointed them out. One of the ones that I showed had Kieran and Damien from last summer, and they were both through your program. Yeah. Damien now is down at Western New England College, I don't know if or university. Yeah. And Kieran is, I think, now at Frontier Regional High School. Yeah. They were fantastic, and they get super involved. And I met with Damien last year. So he came in not having, he wanted to go into business. That's where he's pursuing. That he got fascinated he was actually involved in some of that spring work. Yeah, and just loved it and started digging into polymer science. So it was a lot of fun to watch his transformation over that summer. Always happy to help, and just let me know. Okay. Thank you all for joining this afternoon. I really appreciate it.